Thanks so much, guys, for chiming in here and being willing to be part of this LeaderCast. What I want to talk to you guys about primarily today is kind of shaping your ministry atmosphere. There's so many times in our context that we try to create a ministry atmosphere that's very conducive to students encountering Jesus Christ. But I want to talk about some things that doesn't always get talked about. So before we get into that, as Eric was saying, we have a Next Gen Roundtable coming up. And it's coming up in September. And over that time, we're going to be having two events over the time that you're here. We're going to have our 20 plus. It's our young adult fall event. It's going to be at the University of Minnesota, gigantic event. Chris Harrell's going to be speaking. Then that next morning, we're going to be having the roundtable. And then that evening, Friday evening, we're going to be having our 20 plus event. Our Everyone Nights event, where all of our campuses come together for a huge youth event as well. So you're not going to want to miss it, as we share best practices, and we also talk about what's coming up for youth ministry and young adult ministry in the next 7 to 10 years. So I'm really excited about that. Make sure you register for that. As Eric said, I am the Next Gen pastor. I oversee all of youth across all of our campuses, young adults, and our School of Ministry, RVLI. And today I just want to talk for a little while just about what makes ministry atmospheres work. And at the end, I'm going to just ask you guys what you do as well. So if you have any questions during this, go ahead, type them in the chat. We can get to them. I'm sure Eric will go ahead and pluck those for later on. But I want to talk about what happens when everything in your ministry night is set up right, but doesn't go well. I don't know if you're like me, but that happens a lot. You know, you try to set everything up the best you can, but the energy is low in the room, the engagement is low, students aren't showing up, or if they do show up, they're not mentally there. And that became kind of my story when I first started ministry. You know, I didn't know when I was going to have a great night or a bad night. And when I did have a great night or a bad night, I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't know why. I struggled with, well, it's just going to be one of those nights, and that we're just kind of subject to the fates. That said, God began to convict my heart. And he said, Terry, you should never have a bad night or a good night and not know why. Because you should always know, due to the ministry atmosphere you set up and stewarding what I've given you as a vision, you should always know what contributed to a bad night or a good night. So there's three things that I want to talk to you about today that really helped me to shape the ministry atmosphere according to the vision that God gave me. And there's three words. It's simply access, engagement, and community. Those are the three biggest things in any ministry atmosphere, especially today when we're ministering to millennials and Generation Z, that matters. It's access, it's engagement, and it's community. Now, if you've been here at one of our conferences, you've probably heard me talk about it, or in one of the LeaderCasts, but we're exclusively talking about it today. Because if we don't steward those three things well in our ministry, we'll put on an event, but we will not lead people into an authentic, life-changing relationship with Jesus. And so today we're going to get into that a little bit. Now, just across the room, and I'll just refer to this as a room, just to see how many of you have ever looked at an Instagram post and tried to figure out what they're doing and tried to copy it. I'm going to raise my hand. Some of you don't have the video on, but you know what people go ahead and they take their phone and they try to get that perfect angle with those 10 kids worshiping Jesus out of 100 in their room. And they're trying to get that while the worship team's going all out. And that's the picture they post. And then you look at that, you're like, what's their backdrop look like? Are they using a fog machine? I wonder what song that is on the screen. And you zoom in to try to replicate a certain type of ministry atmosphere. And the reality is the things that we do in a service will always change. Those are lagging indicators for leading indicators that students have, and those leading indicators are the needs of access, engagement, and community. So I'm going to talk about all three of these, and I'm going to talk about then how we apply them, and then I'm going to talk about how they actually function on a Wednesday night here at River Valley. Let's start with access. Access points are absolutely everything in our ministry. When I was in youth group, and I'm 38 now, so I'm Gen X. But when I was in youth group, I remember showing up, and the only way I could access my youth ministry is by showing up on a Wednesday night, or maybe serving on a Sunday. And those are two access points I had to my ministry. And back then it was okay, because if you wanted to access anything, you had to go to the place to access it, whether it was primarily a movie. And if you wanted the best quality movie, you had to go to a movie theater, or playing a video game, you had to go to the arcade, because no video game consoles had good enough graphics for you to play at home. And I remember going to places in order to access what I wanted. Well, today, access points to what we want are no longer resident inside of buildings, but they're resident inside of our hand, what we're carrying around with us. And those access points to what we want are numerous. I mean, think of the movie Frozen, all right? Now, if you're like me, you're sick of it. I mean, it's a marketing machine, and they're coming out with Frozen 2 right now. I know that just blew some of your minds. They're coming out with Frozen 2. And you know they're going to be marketing Frozen on Halloween for costumes, on Christmas when the snow flies. They're going to figure out how to do it on Memorial Day. They're going to figure out how to market Frozen in every area. But you hear the songs, you see the branding, you see the costumes, you see the cereal. I mean, they have marketed Frozen to the next level. And what they've given us is they've given us a proliferation of access points to their product. Their product is the movie. Their product are the characters in the movie. But the way they have given society access to the movie is unprecedented. Forbes has said that it's the #1 product that has the most access points out there right now is Frozen. And so when we think about that, and we think about our movie, and we think about our ministry, how many access points do we have to our ministry? Is it just on a Wednesday night? Is it just on a Sunday? Maybe our access points are a social media post and a Wednesday. That's 2. Maybe it's a leader connecting with another student. That's 3, outside of a Wednesday context. You see, we have to ask ourselves, how many access points do I have to my ministry atmosphere? How many ways can people come engage my ministry, not only on a Wednesday night, but outside of a Wednesday night? And are those access points conducive to every individual, or only a sliver of students that really love Jesus? You see, access points will help us to win the game. And when students come to our services and come to our Wednesday night or Sunday night or whenever you have youth night atmospheres, how many access points do you have for them when they get there? Because some students don't return because they don't have a place to enter into the conversation. They don't have a place to enter into the ministry experience. They're sitting in their seats feeling alone in a room full of people. And it's because many times we don't have the access points that we need. Many times we just have it set up for people that are professional Christians, if that makes sense. So I want to challenge us today, and this is what I challenge myself with all the time, is how many access points do I have to my ministry, be it social media, be it a phone call to a student, be it a text that goes out, be it a leader that connects with a student outside of a Wednesday night atmosphere. Well, how many access points do you have? How many doors to your ministry do you have? And then when students get there, how do you grab them? Like, how do you get their attention? How do you make them feel at home? How do you make them feel the big 3, validity, stability, and consistency? Because let's be honest, salvations should be a given. Holy Spirit baptism should be a given. Students having life change should be a given in our ministries. They shouldn't be a mark of our ministries. They should just be a given. But what isn't always a given in our ministry are things that students need to access our ministry, and that's a stable environment, consistency in relationship, and validity. And when we can give those students those 3 things, those access points become obvious. So think about it. Is everything you do when students show up to a Wednesday night accessible because it's a stable environment, because it's a consistent environment, and because it's a validating environment? Those 3 things will help make access all the more better. Now, I can tell you what to do or how to do and put a cookie oven in the middle of the room so everybody smells cookies when they come in and they feel very welcome. But what we do doesn't impact it as much as why we're doing it. And so when I say, how do you make your ministry atmosphere accessible through those big 3 things, stability, consistency, and validity, that answer is going to be different for all of you. But it's got to be answered. Because if it's not answered, we're just putting on an event. We're just putting on a show. We're doing what we feel is best, but there's no metric behind it. There's no why behind it. So let's focus on that. If I have a student walk into my building and I want our room to be accessible, I want relationships to be accessible, there's many things I have to do, and I have to hit the 5 senses. All right, I have to be able to hit what does a room feel like? Touch. What does it look like? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? You know, you have to hit all those senses to be able to answer that question of accessibility. And when I'm able to answer those questions, when I have a student walk in, am I having leaders that seem very uninterested in who's walking through the door, acting like security? Or do I have people who really want a relationship with these students? Because we know that students can smell a fake a mile away. So when you have greeters at your door, they shouldn't just be doing a job, but they should be fulfilling a calling. And if a student feels welcome, if they feel at home, when they walk in the door from their first impression, that's an access point deeper into your ministry. And that ministry atmosphere will grow. It's not about the excellence of the lighting. It's not about how cool your ministry room is. It's not about how great your worship team is, because I have been in places that don't have the resources, but they have the relationship, and that ministry is bumping. Students are showing up because they want to bring their friends there. You know, you've all had that friend when you were back in high school whose house you always went to. Everybody always went to that one friend's house. You might have been that person. Why? Because that house is accessible for relationship. And they were able to step into that and just feel like they could be themselves and be loved and validated. You've always had those friends that had those amazing parents, and you're like, man, I wish my parents could be like that. Why? Because it made you feel like you're at home, and it made you feel loved, and it made you feel validated. Lights can't do that. Fog machines can't do that. Funny videos can't do that. What can do that is relationship and hitting the 5 senses with what these students need to feel stable, like they're in a consistent environment, and that they're being validated. And those will help you to identify the access points needed, so you're not just throwing your playing darts in the dark, trying to hit a bullseye, but you don't know where the dartboard is. We have to be able to answer those questions. So let's think about this. When students access our ministry and they step into our context, it could be your church building, you could have a youth building, it could be in a home. When they step in, okay, are they accessing it? But on the other side of that door, on the other side of that access point, what are they engaging? What's the content that they're engaging? Is it relationship? Is it a sermon? Is it a worship song? Is it an atmosphere? Is it food? What's the content that they're engaging? Okay? Because we have to understand numbers in the room does not equal engagement. All right? Numbers in the room equals numbers in the room. And I want to illustrate it like this. Imagine you have 5,000 followers on Instagram, right? If you have 5,000 followers on Instagram and every time you post a picture, you get 500 likes, you have 10% engagement, all right? Now imagine I have 500 followers on Instagram, but every time I post a picture, I get 500 likes. I have 100% engagement, okay? You have 5,000 people with 500 likes, 10% engagement. I have 500 people with 500 likes, 100% engagement. Who's more influential on social media? And it's the same way in our ministries. We could have somebody with 5,000 people in their student ministry, but only have 500 students leaning in and engaging what we're providing. We only have 10% engagement in our youth group. But the dude down the street could have 500 kids in his youth ministry and all 500 could be leaning in. He has 100% engagement. Who's the more successful youth pastor now? It's the one who has the most engagement, not the most butts in the seats. And if we're pursuing how many people are sitting in our seats, we're doing it wrong. We have to not only give them access points and make our ministries accessible from top to bottom, but we also have to have the content that they're accessing engaging. We want them to be able to engage. We want that lean in factor. We want that taking notes factor. We want that, not just that hype factor, but that advocacy from students to their friends saying, you got to come to this place. And while they might not be able to articulate because I feel at home here and it's stable and it's consistent and I'm loved, they'll know that by inviting their friends, they'll invite their friends to something amazing that they're feeling. And when they invite their friends there, the content that's being provided to them isn't just a show for them to have an opinion about, but it's something that they can lean into and engage and tie their identity to. So when we preach sermons, are we preaching sermons in our ministry atmosphere that is simply giving our opinion and perspective of the word? Or are we tying it to the students so that they can engage it? Are we giving students the A to Z of the content, or are we just giving them the A to B so that they can take their next step and not just our next step? Are we trying to show the students how theologically savvy we are, even though they can never reach that in the 45 minutes that you have them in the room in front of you? Or are we trying to show them, hey, I see where you're at, and this is what Jesus is asking you to take in terms of your next step. Now, here's a story about how I can help you engage that, and this is how you can tie your story to this story. So many times in our ministries, we try to make the content the best content by making it the most complete content. And what we have to understand with students, and you remember being a teenager, your parents gave you the ultimate goal, what you had to become, what you had to do to be a responsible individual, but you weren't there yet. And all of the students that sit in front of us aren't there yet. My gosh, on a weekend, on a Sunday, all the people that are sitting in the seats aren't there yet. And if we spend time trying to give them the best, most complete content, we can still at the same time fall short of giving them what their next step is. And students will engage more when we show them what their next step is. when we show them how to, where their handles are. Now, I can give handles to a sermon, but if I don't give handles to everybody in the room, then I only engage part of the room. So how do I give handles to the sermon? How do we give handles to our worship experience? Are we singing songs that are telling a story that these students aren't living? Or are we singing a song that you have to have a theological background to be able to understand the implications of the song? Or are the songs that we're singing handles for students to engage a relationship with Jesus? We have to be able to answer those questions. If I'm on the stage and I'm giving, and we're playing a game, we're having a segment up there, or a student is giving a testimony, or something's going on, is there enough handles attached to this thing so that everybody can engage? You know, when I post a picture of me and my kid on social media, all of you with kids know that gets the most likes, hands down. Every time you post a picture of your kid on social media, you'll get more likes than if you post a selfie of yourself. I promise that. And when you post that picture of your kid, who ends up liking that picture first? The students that love you and other parents. That's who likes it. But single people that don't have kids and don't know you aren't going to be liking that picture. Okay? Because we presented content that only has handles to a certain amount of people. And when we preach and when we do worship and we run our service flow and when we create an atmosphere in our lobbies before and after service, sometimes we only put handles on that a certain amount of people can grab onto. And then we wonder why only a certain amount of people are showing up to our ministry. See, we have to make it in a way so people can access it and feel like it's accessible when they're there. But we also have to make our content very, very engaging. You've heard it said that content is king, but today content is a commodity. Everybody has content. In a generation that's no longer consumers, we're publishers. And with everybody publishing, content isn't king. Content is a commodity. So what you create in your content that's engaging has to go beyond what everybody else is putting out there, and it has to give handles to where students are at right now. They might need that relationship from a leader right now more than they need the sermon that you're preaching. They might need to feel like they're loved and that they're safe more than they need to see a really cool worship set go on. So you have to be able to measure where that's at in your youth ministry and provide that. Otherwise, students won't engage what you're doing. Okay? So you have access, engagement, and community. And this is probably the biggest buzzword that's kind of creeping back into society and especially the church world right now, and that's community. And the reason it is because we're realizing that students are running after community more than they're running after event. They're running after a shared experience. It's not personal, individual discovery. The idea of a pioneer doing it alone does not appeal to the next generation. It doesn't appeal to Generation Z. Why? Because they're wired to share. They're wired to publish and get feedback in the moment. That's how they're wired. What was a trend and a toy to me is now an essential for the next generation. You know, when people would take my phone and post their pictures on my social media account, ha, 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 ha. But when I did it to a 9-year-old, they lost it. They're like, you're invading my life and you're publishing what you think should be in my life. And to me, I'm just playing around. To them, I'm invading who they are. And we have to understand with community, students are now more wired for community than event. So if I'm putting on a great event, if I have great access points to my ministry and everything is accessible, and my content is engaging, but you can only experiencing it as an individual on a Wednesday night and not as a community, I'm gonna lose my students. I've seen it, it's happened. And it's not only happened here at River Valley or in our rural context here at River Valley or our metro or our urban context here, but it's happened when I was a youth pastor in Bismarck, North Dakota, to where I was at a single site church. And because all this that I'm talking to you about didn't come when I came to River Valley, it happened when I had 70 kids in my youth group. And I kept using it over and over and over as my ministries changed and grew, because those things have never changed: access, engagement, and community. And when I was creating great events in Bismarck, but I wasn't having community opportunities, then I miss it. And students were leaving my youth ministry, and it wasn't because I had bad sermons or because my atmosphere wasn't conducive for engagement. What it was is I created an atmosphere that demanded that the students answered the altar calls and that they responded to the message and that they had an experience in my ministry as an individual, not as a group. You see, students are all about co-discovery. They're all about shared experience. If I am having an experience, if you see an experience happening, if a meteor fell out of the sky, people would gasp, and then people would do this because they want to be the first one to share their experience with the world. How is your ministry creating that shared experience? Are the altar calls or the way we respond to a message very much based on how I see it as an individual, or a person in their seat responds to the message as an individual? Or is a response made within a community setting? And before we say, well, everybody must make an individual decision to follow Jesus, yes, but they got to make that individual decision within a community. That's why there's a body of Christ. See, Barnum came out with a statistic saying that, I think it's a sharp turn, it's 90% of people that make an individual decision to follow Jesus Christ by themselves walk away from that decision within 4 weeks. But 90% of people that make a decision to follow Jesus Christ, individual decision to follow Jesus Christ within a community setting with people around them making similar decisions, are more likely to stay strong 4 weeks after than fall away, because it's that community setting. I'll say this: community with accountability equals growth and sustainability. Community with accountability equals growth and sustainability. But community without accountability is anarchy. It's a group of people that's not being held to certain standards, and so anarchy breaks loose. We saw it in Egypt with the revolutions. There was no accountability for the revolution or for the group of people protesting. We're seeing it right now with white supremacists trying to get rallies going on. There is no accountability that they're adhering to within that community, so anarchy is breaking out. We are having anarchy break out in our youth groups. So imagine starting a small group, but that small group has no accountability. So it settles to this place of consensus where everybody just says their experience, and their experience is what matters more than what the word says. See, if we don't have accountability within our communities, then people won't stay within those communities, because nobody loves anarchy over a long period of time. But if we have accountability within our communities and we invite people to make a decision within the context of community, they're more likely to stay. That was my salvation experience. I came to a youth group for 2 months before I came to Jesus Christ, but I kept coming back for 2 months because of the love of the people around me. I can't tell you one sermon that was preached. I can tell you a couple times of where I remembered lingering at an altar, raising my hands to a God I never committed to yet. And the reason I did is because of the community of people around me that loved me, made me want to adhere to their standards. It held me accountable. I had to do what they did in order to stay a part of that community. I mean, think of it like a health club. Like, if you want to go to this exclusive health club that you pay, let's say you pay $500 a year, but in order to stay part of it, you had to go 12 times a month, and you had to bring a friend at least once or twice a month, and you had to work on an X amount of machines, but you got a free coffee bar with it, you got free massages, you got free personal trainer, and all that other stuff. You would adhere to the standards of that community just to be able to stay a part of it, so you didn't lose your place in it. But you go to the Y, and I'm sorry for those of you who love the Y, but everybody and anybody could go. There's no standards, so a lot of people don't show up a lot unless they feel like it, or unless they got crazy discipline. You got to understand that within our communities, within our churches, if we don't have shared experience, if we don't have community, then consistent devotion to Jesus doesn't happen, no matter how good our messages are, no matter how good our ministry atmospheres are, no matter how good pre and post service is. Students don't stay as long unless it's within a context of community. That's why your core groups stay core groups, and those students stay long, not because they love you or because your youth group is the best, but because they have community within that. So access, engagement, and community are 3 things that are necessary, and 3 things that provide questions for us that we got to answer in order to make our ministry atmospheres much, much better than what they are. At the end of the day, it's simply stewardship of what God has given us. God has given me a ministry. He's given me a ministry atmosphere to steward. I want to steward it the best. So how many ways am I creating access to it? Is what I'm giving people access to engaging? And is it creating a community and building up the body of Christ? Or am I making people become a body by themselves? Those are the 3 things we got to ask. And it fundamentally shifted, and it changed the way that I did ministry. It changed the way that I preached. It changed the way that I did pre and post service. Like, one of the biggest things was creating the artificial scenario of, what if nobody could get saved in service? What if nobody could come to a saving relationship with Jesus based on what I said from the pulpit? What if the only ways that they could come to Jesus is in the communities that we create before and after service? How would I develop my leaders different if that was the case? And that's how I started developing my leaders. And my leaders started creating community before and after service in a way that's unreal. We had students coming to Jesus Christ in the lobby before and after service because of the communities created. And that's what we have to do to build up the body of Christ. So these three things will force you to ask questions about your ministry, and will actually show you parts of your ministry that are redundancies, that are there because they make you feel better rather than they actually accomplish ministry purpose. And when you do that, our job then is to be able to cut those things away and not have too much pride to hold on to those. And I'm preaching my own experience here. Because when I had those things, those three values, access, engagement, and community, and I ran my ministry through those filters, I found a lot of redundancies, and I found a lot of things in my ministry that I did because it made me feel good rather than doing it because God was telling me to do it. And it helped me to strip it down and to be doing ministry intentionally. I don't want to get my well done, good and faithful servant for putting on a great event, because I won't get my well done, good and faithful servant for doing that. I will for intentionally stewarding what God gave me. If I'm just putting on a great event, I'm burying that talent and hoping it's enough. And it's not enough. I'm not in youth ministry still at the age of 38 because I want to just do a great event. I want to shape a generation. I want to do it. And I want to do whatever it takes to get there. And so these three things have guided me. And so I'm not just saying them to you because there's something I read in the book and I thought they were cool, but they have guided me as I've consistently stewarded my ministries, whether it's in the middle of North Dakota or whether it's in River Valley, in a rural place in River Valley, or in the city. I want to make sure that we're stewarding our ministry environments in a very intentional way. And these are the three ways that I do it. So that said, Eric, I'll kick it to you, and I'll also kick it to the rest of you as well. Talk to me about, and I might be putting words to stuff that you guys are already doing. You might be like, that's it. Yes, absolutely. We're doing this because of that. I would love to hear from some of you, some of the things that you're doing. And also I would love to be able to answer any questions that you might have, because I really clipped through that content. So let's hear from some of you guys. What are you guys doing to kind of create that community, to kind of give students access points, and how to make what you're doing engaging? There's nobody doing it wrong, so we could do this. I got my notebook here too, because I'm gonna steal somebody's ideas.
I actually have a question.
Yeah.
It's not so much probably, so reference point for me. I did student ministries for almost 5 years before coming to the church we're currently at. I'm now a lead pastor in my early 30s, but we're also overseeing student ministries. So we're a smaller church that's growing.
Yep.
And one of the challenges, the group that we came from had a lot of kids who were kind of your go-to kids that could help feel others welcome and create those atmospheres and those connection points.
Yeah.
The church that we've come to, I'm actually struggling to find. It's like a total culture shock for us, where we came from. A lot of these kids are not kids who, like, they're simply okay with being off by themselves. Like, how do you like, in that context of needing those connection points, how do you engage those different types of personalities to hopefully be able to help with even our leaders? The parent, we had two parents. It was a board member and his wife. We had no consistent leadership in youth. And they stepped in last January and have just been there, no background. And so how do you help to create within that context, bringing people?
Yeah, that's a big question. So let me get this. I want to narrow it down so I can answer very specifically. So you're in a context right now to where you're kind of creating a new culture within your youth ministry that's happening there. You don't have the leaders that you would like to have. They don't carry the same values for kind of creating that type of relationship with students. It's just kind of maintaining level right now. Is that correct?
That's about right. Yeah.
Okay, great. And so you're wondering how to take it to the next level up, right? It's so easy to get muddied in what you see in front of you. Like, it's like, I got this kind of student and that kind of student and that kind of student, and these leaders relate with none of those students. So how do I get these students and bring them together? We have to elevate our perspective a little bit higher rather than be in the weeds on that, because otherwise you're going to try to make your ministry suit everybody's personality and not basic needs. I kind of take that there's nothing new under the sun thing. These students, even though they're different, are going to be struggling with the same things at some point. So what's the common handle? So if you can't create a multitude of handles, what's the common handle that everybody will be able to take hold of? And many times we don't like doing that because it seems so basic. The common handle that everybody can take hold of, whether it's what we preach or the access points we give or the community that we create, it seems super basic, and to us it seems shallow. But if you can give something that students can gather around and create community, a common handle, and then have that shared experience with one another, that's key. And so what we do is like, does our ministry atmosphere have a common handle, and what do I have to do to just make this something that everybody can grab? And it might seem plain to you and it might seem vanilla to you, but the reality is it gives people a common ground to be able to stand on. And then you can build from the common ground. So before I say all these great culture building, changing strategies, build a common ground and have that common ground be consistent over and over and over and over, because consistency is one of the needs for accessibility. Just do it over and over. So whether it's our ministry's atmosphere beforehand, how people respond to messages, the worship culture, the message that's preached, create that. Now with your leaders, point out the reason you're doing it. Give them the why before you give them the what. Because anybody, even though they can't physically relate with kids, like I can't relate with a lot of junior hires right now. I want to, but I can't, and the older I get, the harder it gets. But the reality is what they need from me isn't that I relate with their day-to-day, it's that I relate with their needs. And we have leaders, we got this 60-year-old guy who's shown up, and he's like the grandpa of the ministry. And he doesn't provide cool, he doesn't provide trend, he provides relationship and stability. And that dude has the biggest small group we've ever seen. Why? Because it's a common need. So give them the why behind the common need, and then those leaders will see where they can dive in and take hold of it. And then you'll be able to answer the other questions of where do we need to start creating culture. It's going to be a slow burn. There's no quick 3 weeks and you're there on this, but it's going to really help you to be able to get a solid view of what you have and help you to be able to take it to another level.
That's perfect, man. Appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would love your thoughts on something.
Yeah.
We do a once a month youth service, and then every other week is like life group, small group.
Yeah.
And so I'm all about do an event and do it well, do it with excellence because it's once a month, but also trying to value that community. So we're doing that 3 out of the 4 weeks. And so right now, I mean, we're 4 years old as a church, so we're still in baby phase. And I'm trying to establish that we have great attendance on our events, but getting them to come back on that core. They come back on the weekends, but my goal is for them to come every Wednesday.
Yep.
For the community that you're talking about, because we value that. So I feel like it's kind of that you get double the attendance at your once a month event.
Yep.
Then you have a core that's half that percentage at small groups. So do you have on that of just
definitely? Are your small groups on site or off site?
On site. So every Wednesday at 7 at church.
Awesome.
So,
so that's
possible.
Cool. Well, that speaks very much to community. You double your numbers, not because your event is cool, but because the community is better at your events than in your small groups. And the community in small groups is accessible to that clique that comprises that small group, and not everybody can be a part of that clique. So what that's saying is that more people are coming to your events because they feel that they can be part of a greater group without being part of a clique. So how do you take that same ethic and apply it to your small groups? How do you make your small groups more inclusive? How do you help your small group leaders not appeal to the ones that are easiest in the group, but to bring everybody in? And I think that's the key thing. Also re-engineering your small group experience so you have a part of event, so it feels like they're part of something like that once a month deal. That will help them to create a better access point into small groups when you break down into small groups. So like if they show up and it's only small groups on a Wednesday night, they're not going to have that on-ramp into the small groups. So in your services the other 3 weeks out of the month, create a better on-ramp that feels like the event. But when you shift into small groups, they'll already have had that way. They've already would have had that experience that they remember. Like we just had a Coldplay concert here, and people said it was one of the happiest concerts they've ever been to. Just fun and community. Everybody had glow-in-the-dark wristbands and everything else. Community at a Coldplay concert. Like, it's at US Bank Stadium. It was packed out, and yet people felt like they were all one part of community. And the one thing they said is the concert was awesome. It was sensory overload, but everybody was there and everybody was together. That's what they're saying is the primary thing for them is they felt like they were together. And if that's what they're communicating through you, non-verbally through your once-a-month events, then how do you take that same ethic and apply it to your small groups? And don't live or die on a small group structure. Reinvent the small group structure to be conducive to that need that students are saying that they want. So we have once a month. We're going back to it in September. once a month, big youth nights. We're calling them show up nights, first Wednesdays. And then we're having events. But our small groups happen in point 2 of the message. And so they're 20 minutes. But what we do is we open with worship. We go through the whole front end of service like we normally do. And then the youth pastor will create the tension. Like, what's the tension? What's the big idea? Now we're going to take that big idea and go into our groups for 20 minutes. And that's the small group thing. And then we bring them back for worship at the end so they can publish. Because remember, they're publishers, not consumers. And so we want them to go out and publish. So those last 2 songs, they can journal, pray, or worship. And then we call them up front at the end of that last song. So 2 songs on top, 2 songs at the bottom. So you get your whole set in there, but we call them up front at the end of that last song. And like, when you give an exhortation on stage, when students are done worshiping and it feels good, that's point 3 of the sermon. So we re-engineered it because students are wanting both, and that creates a better on-ramp and off-ramp into our small groups. Because sometimes just having small groups is a cold feel. It's like walking to a lunchroom and you don't know where to sit. And everybody just looks up at you and they don't smile at you and they're not inviting or whatever. So if you can kind of create that on-ramp and off-ramp, it's a lot easier. And that's another thing that we do to make community feel better is what's the on-ramp and what's the off-ramp? What leads up to it and what leads out of it to make the next week better? Yep. Anyone else?
So I'm literally brand new at this church and brand new in youth ministry. I'm
Welcome.
22. Thanks. I'm 22 and I've been here for a month. And like a lot of the small group leaders that I have now are small group leaders from like the previous youth pastor or the youth pastor before him. So how do you kind of like rally your youth leaders in a way that says like, I know this is me now, but this is the kind of culture I want to create?
You got to do it fast and you got to do it quick. There's a lot of philosophies moving forward, like just for a year, see who you got and then change the culture. Mm-hmm. I'll say this, and I've seen it many times. When my mom got remarried and my stepdad came into my house, he wanted to be our friend and not our father. And I needed a dad. I didn't need another friend. And the disrespect was off the charts, or the contempt was off the charts because I remembered my previous dad or whatever else and how he used to interact with us and everything else. And when he started to set up boundaries and structures and guardrails for us, our relationship started to flourish. It's the same when you step into another context. The previous dad just bounced, or the previous parent just took off, or they're out there. And so these people are remembering the best times of that while they're trying to attach to you. But what they need is a leader and not a friend. And so one of the biggest things that I do is I set up the structure and the expectations, because if you don't put expectations, there's no bullseye and you can't hold them accountable. I have expectations, and not only with expectations, I tell them where they can fit in with those expectations. And then I raise the lowest common denominator in leadership to a high level. Okay, your leadership team will always fall to its lowest common denominator. That means the crappiest leader on your team that gets to stay, that'll be the level that your best member falls to on their worst day. And the longer that crappy member on your leadership team gets to stay in there, people will continually fall to that more and more, and that's the level of your youth ministry. All right. Now, they might not be crappy because they're crappy people. They might be crappy because they don't engage. They just take up oxygen in the room. So our goal, especially when you come in, is to raise that lowest common denominator through expectation and follow through. Okay, leaders, this is where we're going. Okay. And a lot of people will see that and be like, that's not me. And they'll step out for you. But the ones that are bought in will buy in at that high level because they want to buy in at that high level. So raise that lowest common denominator to a place of excellence. That way, if you have a bad night, it falls to a level of excellence and not to the crappiest person on the team. Does that make sense? You can evoke, and I know I sound a lot stronger, but the structure necessary and the guardrails needed are more important at the front end. You get that discipline in on the front end with a little bit of grace, but you get that discipline in on the front end and you get that structure and those expectations laid out, and you move your ministry ahead. And if they don't step up, you don't stop it to wait for them. You keep going. And that will naturally weed out people for you. Because there are people who are still loyal to former contexts of ministry right now that are serving with you in your context of ministry. They're loyal to the previous ones and they're wondering, how can I convince her? I'm going to wait and see how she does it. But you got to run with what God has in your heart and tell them how they can access it as well. Again, think of this for your leadership team. Am I creating access points to be on my leadership team? Am I creating engagement for my leaders with the ministry? And am I creating community within this? Those 3 things will help people to buy in more to what you're doing. So don't only apply it to an atmosphere for students, but apply it to your atmosphere for your leadership team. Also, in the same time, set up those structures and raise your lowest common denominator of leadership. It takes about a year. A good year, girl. You got this. You got this. You're going to be doing LeaderCast, and we're all going to be listening to you, all right? But you're going to, you got this, okay? And the biggest thing is to set those expectations, know what you expect so you can hold them accountable, and then give them access points to leadership, give them a way to be a leader, not just stand around on a Wednesday night, but to actually engage the students and give them a way to have a community of leaders. That means have barbecues. That means have leader meetings. That means just create community and help them to grow. And it'll take a good year. And at the end of that year, you'll know what you want and you'll know what's needed, you know? But the fact that they're there and they're hanging on speaks volumes that they want to be a part of that ministry.
True.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Good. Anyone else? Again, if there's anybody that's doing anything that you found something has worked for you in terms of access, engagement, and community in your service, I'd love to hear about it. Otherwise, we'll kick it to Eric.
Every Wednesday, we seem to end up at Applebee's, but it's not like me and the leaders like, oh man, I treat my leaders so good. It's me and like 10 kids. Because they're like, because the last youth pastor wasn't very relational. So they're like, oh man, you're like mom now. And I'm like, okay. But like the way you were talking about stewarding that time, like we spend like an hour and a half at Applebee's and we talk about nothing.
Yeah.
So it's like, how can I optimize that time to be the best and not have another youth service?
Yeah, honestly, that time is needed for those students to have community. They're sharing their experiences with you. So what you view as them talking about nothing is them looking for validity through what they're experiencing and their thoughts. Your role isn't so much to determine what they're talking about as much as to guide it and biblically guide it. Sometimes the conversation goes off the rails, then that's where you step in and bring it back on the rails. But you don't have to make it a small group and you don't have to make it, but if it goes in the way of spiritual conversation, foster that. You know, knowing that you're willing to be able to validate what they're thinking is everything and answer their question, and that you don't think their question is dumb. When they see that, they're bought in even more. And so they're sharing their experience. They're in essence publishing around a table at Applebee's. And when they're publishing, if you can create a sense of accountability with that community and keep the conversation on the rails, you will create a greater environment. And that group is going to grow from 10 to 20 to 30 just because they love that one-on-one time with you. You know, they feel special because they're with you, but now you're going to be able to use that as a formative process in their life.
All right. People getting saved at Applebee's.
Get it. Do it. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Cool. Eric, I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, well, hey guys, just want to say thank you for being a part today. Terry, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to invest what we're doing through the network, invest in the next generation here at River Valley, but love what you guys are experiencing at your churches and what you guys are doing and investing in the next generation where you're at in your communities, because it goes beyond River Valley and it goes to where you guys are at, the community that you guys are in, and where you're investing is somewhere where we may never be or be able to touch. And so we're all about championing the Capital C Church and just having a greater kingdom impact. And so we love being on the ride with you guys. We love being on the journey because we're all on the same team. We're all plugging away at the same end goals here. And so if there's any way that we could be a resource to you here at River Valley, beyond LeaderCast, beyond the network, anything we could do at all, please feel free to reach out to us. As always, this is going to be recorded and uploaded to the network site so you can go back and watch it, as well as all Terry's previous LeaderCast that he's done, which he's done a multitude on Next Gen and Youth. You can go back and watch those on the network website. But again, Terry, thank you for your time today. Thank you for investing. And guys, thank you for taking time out of your schedules and your ministries to plug in today and connect with others around the country. So love having you guys a part. Yeah.
Eric, real quick, guys and girls, I'm putting my number on there in the chat. If you guys need to connect beyond this, I would love to connect with you. Talk through ministry stuff, share best practices. Let's not just leave it at LeaderCast. Let's be the community. Let's be the network that we all want to be a part of. So if you want to connect with me, I put my number in the chat. Use it. You have it for a reason. Text. I would love to make this a priority. Also, if you have a ministry and your ministry has a social media account, follow me, because I love to pray for your ministries as I scroll through them on Wednesdays. And I intentionally look for the River Valley Network people to just pray for their ministries. So if you could, I would love to be able to do that and just to be able to, lift your ministries up to God every single week. So that's my information. I would love to stay in touch and stay accessible to you guys.
Right on. Thank you guys. You guys have a great day, and we'll see you guys again soon.
All right. Thanks.